So hello and welcome to this presentation on the Greenest City Neighborhood Small Grants Funding Priorities for 2024. I'm Tina and I work for the city's sustainability team, and together we work with the Vancouver Foundation and Neighbourhood Houses to administer the Greenest City Neighborhood Small Grants Program, which provides up to $500 grants for neighbor-led actions supporting our climate work. I'd like to begin this presentation by acknowledging that I am giving it on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and we really thank them for having cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial. Now, as funders for climate initiatives, it's really important that city staff acknowledge the systemic inequities that have benefited and favored some groups while disproportionately impacting cultural communities, Indigenous, Black, and people of color over time. And we also recognize that climate change impacts groups differently. So we have the responsibility to address these systemic inequities in a way that really expands access and creates ways of advancing sustainability in Vancouver together. So the purpose of this presentation is to let you know about Vancouver's policies related to climate change. Since the Greenest City Neighbourhood Small Grants are designed to support these policies, I'm here to talk about what they are and their major focus areas, and also to help give some ideas of the kinds of projects that are top priority for us to support. So first, I'm going to provide an overview of Vancouver's climate policies, and then I will give some examples of the kinds of preferred neighbor-led projects that we would love to see funded under the Greenest City Neighbourhood Small Grants. Let's start first with Vancouver's climate policies. So you may recognize this framework. It was the Greenest City Action Plan, and this plan underpinned the city's sustainability work for the past decade. The work was organized under three objectives, so zero carbon, zero waste, and healthy ecosystems. And our Greenest City Action Plan came to a close in 2020. So a number of the goals from this plan, such as green buildings and green transportation, were carried forward in the Climate Emergency Action Plan. And we'll discuss what the Climate Emergency Action Plan is in a moment. But other goals with a complementary focus, such as waste and food systems, are still a priority at the City of Vancouver and are eligible for grants in 2024. We're going to cover the full list of eligible areas in part 2 of this presentation, but for now, the takeaway is that we have a different framework to walk you through. So let's talk about the reason for that change. In 2019, Vancouver City Council declared a climate emergency as a result of a report by the International Panel for Climate Change indicating that we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid global catastrophe. So from there, city staff went to work on putting together a plan for tackling carbon pollution, which is what causes climate change. We're going to discuss the areas of this plan in a minute, but first we need to talk about where carbon pollution comes from in Vancouver. So the first important thing to recognize is that carbon pollution is caused by human activities that involve burning fossil fuels. And in Vancouver, there are two major sources of this. So one is burning natural gas for heating and hot water in our buildings. Our homes mostly use natural gas furnaces, and so switching away from this fossil fuel and improving our energy efficiency is really a big part of the transition that we need to make. The second area is burning gas and diesel in vehicles, and so the cars that we drive are the second biggest source of carbon pollution. You'll also note here that there are smaller shares for waste rotting in the landfill and electricity, and that is low because our electricity in BC is actually renewable. Now, this brings us to our current framework, or what Vancouver is doing about climate change, which focuses on our best tools for action. So municipal tools for climate action include regulation, investments, and advocating to other levels of government for change. Our actions to combat climate change fall under two major policies or areas. So climate mitigation, or avoiding the unmanageable, is about reducing carbon pollution at the source by changing or modifying the activities that burn fossil fuels. So Vancouver's plan for this is the Climate Emergency Action Plan, and it was adopted by Council in 2020. And it focuses mainly on reducing carbon pollution from buildings and from transportation. Now, climate adaptation, or managing the unavoidable, is about preparing for impacts of climate that are already on their way. So Vancouver has a strategy for this as well. It's called the Climate Change Adaptation Strategy, and it's a little bit older than the Climate Emergency Action Plan. It was first adopted by Council in 2012. The strategy has been updated in 2018, and it will receive another refresh again in early 2024. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about both of these strategies now. So our Climate Emergency Action Plan has the goal of cutting carbon pollution in half by the year 2050. The goals are broken into 6 areas or big moves. So big move 1 is across the top there, and it is cross-cutting because it takes a look at how we plan our neighborhoods. Policy decisions can really make for denser neighborhoods where cars need to be driven less, and neighborhoods can be made up of greener buildings. So that's what this action area is about. Big moves 2 and 3 focus on our transportation carbon pollution. So we really have actions that are focused on improving cycling and walking and rolling throughout the city, and also supporting electric vehicles. Big moves 4 and 5 focus on buildings related carbon pollution. So we focus both on the way that we heat and provide hot water to existing homes, as well as introducing better construction practices and materials in new buildings. And the last big move 6, is important because we also need to suck out carbon from the atmosphere to be successful at limiting global warming. So forests and wetlands offer natural climate solutions in order to be able to do this. Now let's talk about our climate change adaptation strategy. So this strategy identifies and plans for wide-reaching impacts to the city now and into the future. There is a focus on completing a vulnerability and risk assessment and action planning for the medium and high-risk impacts. So core actions in this plan are divided into 5 major areas, which include climate robust infrastructure, climate resilient buildings, connected and prepared communities, coastal preparedness, and healthy and vigorous natural areas. Each of these actions deals with hazards that we are more likely to be exposed to as the severity of climate change increases. So sea level rise, extreme rainfall, poor air quality, and more heat waves are all impacts that we expect to become more severe into the future and that we have plans to deal with through this strategy. It's important to note that both of these plans are rooted in equity. So climate change disproportionately impacts those of us who are most vulnerable, and so to ensure climate action can really improve the quality of life for all Vancouver residents, including those in disproportionately impacted populations, the city is taking steps to expect earlier action from those who can afford it and working on providing supports for those who are most in need. So that now covers Vancouver's current policies. And next, what I want to do is cover how residents can support this and the examples of the kinds of projects that are top priority for us to fund within the Greenest City Neighbourhood small grants. Something that's important to note is that addressing climate change in Vancouver depends on all of us. So I've just shared the plans that the city has to tackle climate change, but all levels of government, from federal to municipal, and businesses and organizations and even individuals, we all have really unique tools that we can deploy to make a difference. So through the Greenest City Neighbourhood Small Grants, we really want to support resident-led projects that contribute to the City of Vancouver's climate goals. The top funding priority projects are those that directly help advance our Climate Emergency Action Plan and our Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. So you might be wondering how it is that residents can support this work through the Greenest City Neighbourhood Small Grants funding. So there are 4 main ways. One is reducing carbon pollution. So residents can take steps in their own lifestyles to reduce their carbon pollution and encourage their neighbors and communities to as well. And I will cover specific areas that are most impactful in a moment. The second is preparing for climate impacts. So residents can also support our climate goals by ensuring that they're prepared for climate impacts that are already on their way and helping others to prepare. The third is educating on climate solutions. So we've done resident polling and we know that resident concern is high about climate change, but that the local causes and solutions to climate change are not very well understood. So those who are passionate and aware of what kind of action is needed from the city and from businesses and organizations and other residents can help spread that awareness in their community to build the support that is needed for the kind of change we need to see. And fourth is prioritizing climate equity. So across it all, supporting climate equity and justice means that we can all take steps to ensure that no one is left behind or adversely affected by climate change. This could look like a number of things, such as helping neighbors who are particularly vulnerable to climate impacts like heat waves. So I want to talk about what each of these look like in more detail and give some examples of neighbor-led projects that you might be interested in applying for through this grant. So first are projects that reduce carbon pollution. Resident-led projects that directly support carbon pollution reduction are a top priority for us. As mentioned, our two biggest sources of carbon pollution in Vancouver are buildings and transportation. So projects with a focus on these two areas are particularly impactful. Some examples of projects that reduce carbon pollution in buildings and make homes more energy efficient are as follows. So you could take on home energy workshops or inviting in an energy advisor for multiple home energy audits. Any projects that really seek to support neighbors in getting information or taking steps to make simple climate-friendly home improvements like upgrading home insulation or windows and doors. Some examples of projects that reduce carbon pollution in transportation are those that help people drive less. So these could include running bike repair and cycling clinics, organizing neighborhood walking or cycling challenges, and carpooling or ride-sharing initiatives. Now, another way to reduce carbon pollution that also helps us to adapt to the changes on their way with climate change is by taking care of our natural climate solutions, as I mentioned, that help to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. So some examples of resident-led projects that support this are tree planting and caring for existing trees, organizing groups to take steps to restore and protect natural areas in the community, like nearby wetlands or marshes, neighborhood greening projects, or invasive species removal projects. Examples of projects that can also help the community prepare for the impacts of climate include running climate preparedness workshops that encourage residents to think through a plan of action in case of an extreme weather event like heat wave or flooding, or creating a neighbor support program to check in on neighbors during events like storms and heat waves. Now, some other types of projects that are top priority for us are those that educate on climate or support climate justice and equity in our communities. So some examples of what educating about local climate impacts and solutions could look like include running educational info sessions or bringing in a speaker or hosting conversations with friends and family and community about climate change to spread awareness, art projects or community signage that really help to inform about climate action, and hosting neighborhood climate action fairs, which could introduce people to opportunities to volunteer with local climate action organizations. Examples of projects that help to prioritize climate equity and justice include any of the preceding project ideas that are designed to benefit equity, deserving, and disproportionately impacted groups, such as creating a plan to check in specifically on vulnerable individuals like seniors during extreme weather events, running a sustainable transportation initiative that might benefit groups that may have limited travel options due to their finances, and running climate education workshops in specific languages to help people who might have a harder time accessing this information in English. Basically, ensuring that no one is left behind when it comes to climate action. Now, the Greenest City Neighborhood Small Grants were originally created to support the Greenest City Action Plan. And although the Greenest City Action Plan came to a close in 2020, food and waste projects with a complementary focus to our climate work continue to be eligible for grants in 2024. So when it comes to food projects, the focus should really be on projects that help to reduce carbon pollution related to the distance our food travels to reach us, as well as the carbon footprint of certain kinds of foods. So types of projects could include those that encourage low carbon diets or support sustainable food production. Now, most of the carbon pollution in Vancouver's local inventory comes from food rotting in the landfill when it comes to zero waste. As such, projects that focus on reducing and avoiding food waste are key. But other types of projects that are eligible include those that promote the repair and reuse of personal items, such as repair workshops for textiles and small appliances, and promoting buying local and avoiding the carbon pollution that comes from the miles traveled for goods to reach us. Now that concludes this presentation. So I hope that you found it helpful. And if you're interested in applying for a Greenest City Neighborhood Small Grant, feel free to visit your local Vancouver community page for more details.